The day my stepmother sold me for just $100, I stopped believing anyone could ever love me. She stood there smiling as if she'd finally gotten rid of a burden, while a dirty homeless man pulled a few wrinkled bills from his pocket and placed exactly $100 into her hand. The neighbors laughed, some even clapped, and as I stood there crying, I couldn't stop wondering if that was really all my life was worth. I was terrified when he reached for my hand. His clothes were filthy, his beard was overgrown, and people stepped out of his way as if he carried nothing but misery wherever he went. I wanted to run, but I had nowhere to go. Then, as we walked away, he leaned close and quietly whispered something that made no sense. "Trust me. You're safer with me than you ever were in that house." I thought he was lying. What I didn't know was that this man had been pretending to be homeless for months, and 3 days later, he took me to the tallest building in the city. The moment we walked through the front doors, security guards snapped to attention, executives rushed to greet him, and hundreds of employees stood in complete silence. That's when I realized the homeless man my stepmother mocked was the city's richest CEO, and my stepmother had just made the biggest mistake of her life. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 22 years old, and until a few days ago, I believed the only family I had left was my stepmother. People always say home is the safest place in the world. For me, it became the one place I prayed I could escape. When I was 12, my mother lost her battle with cancer. The last thing she ever told me was, "No matter what happens, always be kind." I didn't know those words would become the only part of her I'd have left. For the next 2 years, it was just my father and me. We didn't have much, but every night he'd smile and remind me that as long as we had each other, we'd never be alone. Then he met Linda. At first, she seemed wonderful. She cooked for us, laughed at my father's jokes, and treated me like her own daughter. I actually thanked God for bringing her into our lives. 6 months later, they got married. That was the biggest mistake my father ever made. Almost overnight, everything changed. The woman who once called me sweetheart suddenly treated me like I was nothing more than a burden. She took my bedroom, moved me into a tiny storage room, and expected me to clean, cook, and take care of the entire house, while she criticized everything I did. No matter how hard I tried, I was never good enough. The worst part wasn't the insults. It was watching my father slowly disappear. Every time he defended me, Linda somehow convinced him I was the problem. Little by little, the strongest man I'd ever known became quieter and quieter. Then, when I was 17, I lost him too. A sudden heart attack took him away before I even had the chance to say goodbye. The day we buried my father, I thought I'd already experienced the worst pain imaginable. I was wrong. Less than a week after the funeral, Linda sold almost everything he had ever loved. His truck, his tools, his watch, even the old guitar he always promised he'd teach my children to play someday. When I asked about the college fund my father had spent years saving for me, she looked me straight in the eyes, smiled, and said, "Why would I waste that kind of money on someone like you?" That was the day I realized no one was coming to save me. I got a job at a small diner and spent the next 5 years saving every dollar I could, dreaming of the day I'd finally escape. But every payday, Linda took almost all of my paycheck, claiming I owed her for living under her roof. I kept telling myself that if I worked hard enough, someday I'd finally be free. I had no idea she wasn't planning to let me leave. Looking back now, I realized she had been waiting for the perfect opportunity all along. Because the place that was supposed to protect me became the place where I was sold. And one rainy afternoon, Linda finally got exactly what she wanted. The rain had been falling since morning. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the old house felt colder than ever. I had just finished mopping the kitchen floor when Linda called my name. "Emma, get in here, now." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. In 5 years, I'd learned to recognize the difference between her being angry and her being excited. That day, she sounded excited. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked into the living room. A man I'd never seen before was standing near the front door. His clothes were torn and stained with dirt. His shoes looked like they were falling apart, and his long, messy beard hid most of his face. He carried everything he owned in an old backpack hanging over one shoulder. The smell of rain and the streets clung to him. If I'd passed him on the sidewalk, I probably would have looked away like everyone else. Linda looked at him with complete disgust. "You're late," she snapped. The man didn't argue. He simply reached into his worn jacket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and quietly counted them onto the table. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Exactly $100. I stared at the money, confused. "What's going on?" I asked. Linda slowly picked up the cash, counted it again with a smile, then slipped it into her pocket. She looked at me the same way someone looks at an old piece of furniture they can't wait to throw away. "Congratulations," she said with a laugh. "You're his now." I thought she was joking. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you," she replied. "I've spent years feeding you, clothing you, and putting a roof over your head. It's time someone else became your problem." My heart started pounding. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious." She grabbed my wrist and shoved me toward the man so hard I nearly lost my balance. "Take her, that's what you paid for." I pulled my arm back immediately. "I'm not going anywhere with him." Linda's smile disappeared. "You don't have a choice. This isn't legal." "Who's going to stop me?" she asked. You don't have any money? No family? And nowhere else to go?" Those words hit me harder than the shove, because deep down, I knew she was right. At that moment, a few neighbors who had been watching through their windows stepped outside, curious about the shouting. Instead of helping me, they laughed. "A homeless man actually paid for her?" one of them joked. "He got ripped off," another said, and everyone burst into laughter. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. The man never laughed. He never even looked at the neighbors. Instead, he quietly picked up his backpack, walked over to me, and held out his hand. "We should go," he said softly. I stared at him with tears running down my face. I expected to see cruelty in his eyes. Instead, I saw something I couldn't explain. Kindness. I didn't take his hand. "Please," I whispered, "don't do this." For the first time, he looked directly into my eyes. Then he said the words that stayed with me for the rest of my life. "Trust me. You're safer with me than you ever were in this house." I wanted to believe he was lying, but I had no idea that walking out that front door was the first step toward discovering the truth that would change my life forever. I followed him because I didn't have a choice. The rain soaked through my clothes as we walked away from the only home I'd ever known. I never looked back. A part of me was afraid I'd see Linda standing at the door, smiling because she'd finally gotten rid of me. The man walked quietly beside me, keeping a respectful distance. He never tried to grab my arm or rush me. He simply walked as if he knew exactly where we were going. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of us said a word. Finally, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why would you give her $100 for me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked ahead and quietly said, "Because you needed someone to." His answer only confused me more. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know," he replied calmly. "One day it will." I almost laughed. Nothing about this man made sense. His clothes were old enough to belong in a trash bin. His backpack looked like it had been stitched together a dozen times. But the way he spoke, it didn't match the way he looked. Every word was calm, careful, thoughtful. As we crossed another street, something strange happened. A black luxury sedan stopped at a red light beside us. The driver glanced toward the man, his eyes widening for just a second. He gave a small, respectful nod. The man nodded back. Then the light turned green, and the car drove away. "Do you know him?" I asked. "Not really," he answered. It was an odd response. It sounded truthful, but incomplete. A few minutes later, we passed a small bakery. The owner stepped outside carrying a bag of fresh bread. "Sir," the old woman called with a warm smile, "you forgot this yesterday." The man smiled politely. "Thank you." She handed him the bag without asking for any money. "Take care of yourself," she said before going back inside. I frowned. "I thought you said you didn't have any money." He looked at the paper bag in his hands. "I never said that." That answer stayed in my mind. He never said he was homeless. I had simply assumed he was. We eventually reached a small apartment building near the edge of the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean. He unlocked the front door and stepped aside. After you, I hesitated. You're not coming in? Only if you're comfortable with it. No man had ever asked me that before. For years, I'd lived in a house where every decision was made for me. Now, a complete stranger was asking for my permission. Slowly, I stepped inside. The apartment was simple but spotless. There were neatly arranged books on a shelf, fresh flowers on the table, and everything was perfectly organized. Nothing matched the image I'd created in my mind. He placed the bag of bread on the kitchen counter. You must be hungry. Without another word, he began making dinner. He handed me the only chair at the table and quietly stood by the stove. For the first time in years, someone was taking care of me. I still didn't trust him, but for the first time since my father died, I didn't feel afraid. What I still didn't understand was why a man everyone believed was homeless lived with such quiet dignity. And I was about to discover that this was only the first clue that nothing about him was what it seemed. That night, I kept waiting for his kindness to disappear. I'd spent so many years living with Linda that I'd learned one painful lesson. People were only nice when they wanted something from you. So I told myself this was no different. He set a bowl of hot vegetable soup and 2 slices of fresh bread in front of me. Eat while it's warm, he said quietly. I didn't touch it. What's wrong? He asked. What do you want from me? He looked genuinely surprised. Nothing. Nobody gives a stranger food for nothing. Maybe they should, he replied. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was lying. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't trying to impress me. He simply picked up his spoon and started eating his own dinner. After a few minutes, my stomach won the argument. I took my first bite. It was the best meal I'd had in years. Not because it was expensive, because nobody had ever cooked for me with kindness before. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality came rushing back. What happens now? I asked quietly. Tonight you rest. And tomorrow? Tomorrow will take care of itself. You still haven't told me your name. He was silent for a second. My name is Daniel. Just Daniel. A faint smile crossed his face. For now? That's enough. Every answer he gave seemed to create 2 more questions. After dinner, he showed me a small bedroom. You'll sleep here. The room wasn't fancy. There was a neatly made bed, a wooden dresser, a lamp beside the window, and a folded blanket resting on the pillow. To anyone else, it would have looked ordinary. To me, it felt like a luxury hotel. Where will you sleep? I asked. On the couch. Why? Because you deserve to feel safe. I didn't know how to answer that. No one had cared whether I felt safe since my father died. When he closed the bedroom door, he didn't lock it. He didn't even pull it completely shut. Good night, Emma, he said. I froze. How do you know my name? He looked at me for a brief moment. Because I made sure I knew who I was helping? Then he quietly walked away. Sleep should have come easily after everything that had happened. Instead, I lay awake for hours. One question kept repeating in my mind. Who was Daniel? He looked like a man who had lost everything, but he carried himself like someone who had nothing left to prove. Little did I know. Before the sun rose the next morning, I'd witnessed something that would make me question everything I believed about him. I don't remember when I finally fell asleep, but I remember exactly what woke me up. A knock. Not on my bedroom door. On the apartment's front door. I glanced at the clock beside the bed. 6:30 in the morning. Who would visit a homeless man that early? Carefully, I stepped out of the bedroom, leaving the door slightly open. Daniel was already awake. His hair was still messy, and he wore the same worn-out clothes from yesterday. When he opened the door, a young man in a perfectly tailored business suit stood outside, carrying a thick leather folder. Good morning, sir, the young man said politely. Sir, and Daniel stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind him. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I caught a few words. The meeting. It has been confirmed. The board is waiting. We'll leave whenever you're ready. The board. Meeting vast. Nothing about that conversation matched the man I'd met yesterday. A few minutes later, the suited man handed Daniel the leather folder, gave a respectful nod, and walked away. Daniel came back inside as if nothing unusual had happened. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Who was that?" "Someone from work." "Work? Everyone has to make a living." It wasn't exactly an answer. After breakfast, Daniel suggested we take a walk. The rain had stopped, and the streets were beginning to fill with people on their way to work. As we walked through the neighborhood, I noticed something strange. People kept greeting Daniel. The florist waved at him. "Morning, Daniel." The newspaper vendor smiled. "Good to see you again." An elderly man sitting outside a coffee shop stood up just to shake his hand. "Take care of yourself," the old man said warmly. No one looked at him with pity. No one treated him like he was invisible. They treated him with respect. "I don't understand," I finally said. "Understand what?" "Everyone knows you. But nobody looks at you the way people usually look at someone who's homeless." Daniel looked ahead, a faint smile on his face. "Appearances can be very convincing." "What does that mean?" "It means most people stop looking once they think they've found the answer." His words stayed with me. For the next few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then we reached the downtown district. Towering glass buildings stretched into the sky, reflecting the morning sunlight. "Why are we here?" I asked. "Because there's someone I want you to meet." "And who?" Daniel looked at the tallest building in the city. "Someone who's been waiting a long time to meet you." I followed his gaze to the massive skyscraper. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, I'd discover the truth that would change everything I thought I knew about the quiet man everyone had mistaken for a homeless stranger. We stopped in front of the tallest building I'd ever seen. Its glass walls stretched into the clouds, reflecting the morning sun like a giant mirror. People in expensive suits hurried through the revolving doors, coffee in one hand and briefcases in the other. I looked down at my faded jeans and worn sneakers. "Daniel, I don't think we belong here." "Don't worry," he said calmly. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." Before I could ask another question, he pushed open the glass door. The moment we stepped inside, everything changed. The lobby was breathtaking. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and elegant artwork covered the walls. I'd never seen a place so beautiful. I lowered my head, embarrassed by the way I looked. "Maybe we should leave," I whispered. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he kept walking toward the reception desk. The young receptionist looked up. The second she saw Daniel, she stood up so quickly that her chair rolled backward. "Good morning, sir," she said respectfully. "Sir, My eyes shifted toward Daniel. He simply smiled and nodded. "Good morning, Anna." She already knew his name. Before I could process what was happening, the security guards near the elevators immediately straightened their posture. "Good morning, sir," they said almost in unison. Daniel greeted each of them by name. None of them seemed surprised by his worn-out clothes. It was as if they didn't even notice them. People across the lobby began whispering, "He's here. The chairman's finally back. The board meeting can start now. Who's the young woman with him?" My heart started racing. Chairman. Board meeting? None of this made any sense. Just then, the elevator doors opened. 6 men and women in perfectly tailored business suits stepped out. They looked like the kind of people who ran billion-dollar companies. The moment they saw Daniel, every one of them stopped walking. Then, almost at the same time, they respectfully lowered their heads. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," one of them said. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Carter." I slowly turned toward Daniel. He looked exactly the same as he had yesterday. The same worn jacket, the same old backpack, the same gentle smile. The only thing that had changed was the world around him. One of the executives glanced toward me. "Sir," he asked politely, "is this the young lady you told us about?" Daniel looked at me. "Yes. Please make sure she's treated as our most important guest." "Of course, sir." The executive immediately turned to me. "Miss Carter, and welcome. We're honored to have you here." I couldn't breathe. "Daniel, who are you?" For the first time since we'd met, he answered without avoiding the question. "My full name is Daniel Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Carter Global Holdings." I couldn't say a single word. The man everyone had mistaken for a homeless stranger was standing at the top of an empire. Every clue I'd ignored, every strange encounter, every respectful nod, suddenly made perfect sense. But none of those answers mattered anymore. Only one question kept echoing inside my head. Why me? Why would a man who could have anything in the world choose to rescue someone like me? I had no idea, but something about it didn't feel right. So I decided to see the truth with my own eyes. My heart skipped a beat. You were watching us? I was watching your stepmother, he replied calmly. For 3 months, I visited your neighborhood dressed exactly the way you first saw me. I watched how people treated one another when they believed no one important was around. I watched your neighbors look away. I watched Linda humiliate you. And I watched you do something that almost no one else did. You never stopped being kind. Memories flashed through my mind. Sharing half my lunch with an elderly woman sitting alone, helping a little boy gather the groceries he'd dropped across the sidewalk, giving my umbrella to a stranger while I walked home soaked in the rain. I never imagined anyone had noticed. Most people become bitter after years of suffering, Daniel said quietly. You didn't. Why? Without even thinking, the answer slipped out. Because, no matter what happens, always be kind. Daniel's expression changed. For the first time since we'd met, I saw real emotion in his eyes. Those words, he barely whispered them. Where did you hear them? My mother. They were the last words she ever said to me. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with memories. Emma. There's something I've needed to tell you. He took a slow breath. I knew your mother. My heart stopped. What? Nothing in the world could have prepared me for what he was about to tell me next. I couldn't move. You knew my mother. Daniel nodded slowly. Long before anyone called me a CEO, I was just a frightened young man trying to survive. I had nothing. No money, no connections, no future I could see. Every company I approached turned me away. Every investor laughed at my ideas. There were days I wondered if giving up would be easier than trying again. People across the lobby began whispering, "He's here. The chairman's finally back. The board meeting can start now. Who's the young woman with him?" My heart started racing. Chairman. Board meeting? None of this made any sense. Just then, the elevator doors opened. 6 men and women in perfectly tailored business suits stepped out. They looked like the kind of people who ran billion-dollar companies. The moment they saw Daniel, every one of them stopped walking. Then, almost at the same time, they respectfully lowered their heads. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," one of them said. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Carter." I slowly turned toward Daniel. He looked exactly the same as he had yesterday. The same worn jacket, the same old backpack, the same gentle smile. The only thing that had changed was the world around him. One of the executives glanced toward me. "Sir," he asked politely, "is this the young lady you told us about?" Daniel looked at me. "Yes. Please make sure she's treated as our most important guest." "Of course, sir." The executive immediately turned to me. "Miss Carter, and welcome. We're honored to have you here." I couldn't breathe. "Daniel, who are you?" For the first time since we'd met, he answered without avoiding the question. "My full name is Daniel Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Carter Global Holdings." I couldn't say a single word. The man everyone had mistaken for a homeless stranger was standing at the top of an empire. Every clue I'd ignored, every strange encounter, every respectful nod, suddenly made perfect sense. But none of those answers mattered anymore. Only one question kept echoing inside my head. Why me? Why would a man who could have anything in the world choose to rescue someone like me? I had no idea. He looked out the window, lost in memories. One rainy afternoon, I collapsed outside a small neighborhood cafe. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. Hundreds of people walked past me. Some looked away. Some pretended they didn't see me. Most never slowed down. Then your mother stopped. My chest tightened. She didn't ask whether I deserved help. She didn't ask who I was. She simply knelt beside me, handed me her lunch, and asked if I was all right. I could almost picture it. My mother had always been like that. Before she left, Daniel continued, she smiled and said something I'll never forget. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change someone's entire life. Tears filled my eyes. That lunch kept me alive for another day, but her kindness gave me something even more valuable: hope. For the first time in months, I believed someone thought my life was worth saving. A week later, someone finally agreed to listen to my business idea. That meeting changed everything. Years passed, the company grew, my life changed completely. But I never forgot the woman who had helped a complete stranger expecting nothing in return. I searched for her more than once, hoping I could thank her. Every time, I was too late. I felt tears running down my face. She never told me any of that. People like your mother rarely talk about the good they've done, Daniel said softly. To them, kindness isn't something to be remembered. It's simply the right thing to do. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then a thought suddenly crossed my mind. If you spent years looking for her, how did you find me? Daniel's expression became serious. Because the anonymous report included your name? When I saw your last name, I hoped it was only a coincidence. But after watching you for those 3 months, I began hearing your mother's voice every time you helped someone. You have her heart, Emma. That's when I knew. I lowered my head, overwhelmed. For years, Linda had convinced me I was worthless. And now, for the first time since my father died, someone was telling me I reminded them of the best person I'd ever known. There's something else you deserve to know, Daniel said quietly. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it. Your stepmother didn't just steal your childhood. She stole something your parents wanted you to have. I looked up. What do you mean? Daniel slowly reached into the leather folder he'd been carrying since that morning. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk between us. Everything you've been told about your father's final wishes was a lie. As I stared at the envelope with my name written across the front, I realized my stepmother's biggest secret was finally about to be exposed. My hands were shaking as I stared at the envelope. My name was written across the front in neat, familiar handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That's impossible, I whispered. My father died 5 years ago. Daniel gently pushed the envelope closer. He did. But before he passed away, he made arrangements in case something ever happened to him. He wanted to make sure your future was protected. I slowly picked up the envelope. The paper felt old, as if it had been waiting years for this exact moment. Why didn't I ever receive this? Daniel's expression hardened. Because someone made sure you wouldn't. A chill ran through my body. Linda, he nodded. After your father's death, she gained temporary control over his personal documents while the estate was being settled. That's when the envelope disappeared. She hid it from you. I felt sick. All these years, yes, she knew exactly what was inside, and she couldn't risk you finding it. My fingers trembled as I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter. The moment I saw my father's handwriting, the tears came. Take your time, Daniel said quietly. I unfolded the letter and began to read. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then life didn't unfold the way I prayed it would. First, I need you to know something. I have loved you every single day of your life, and nothing, not even death, could ever change that. My vision blurred with tears. If I am gone, promise me one thing. Never believe anyone who tells you that you're worthless. You are the greatest blessing your mother and I were ever given. I covered my mouth, trying not to cry out loud. There's something I've kept secret until now because I wanted to tell you when you were older. Everything I own. The house, my savings, my investments, and the land your mother inherited from your grandparents belongs to you. I froze. What? Linda has no legal claim to any of it. I've placed everything into a protected trust that becomes yours on your 22nd birthday. If anyone tries to keep it from you, they are stealing what is rightfully yours. The letter slipped slightly in my hands. For 5 years, I'd believed we were poor. I'd worked endless shifts at the diner. I'd watched Linda steal my paychecks. And all along, my father had already secured my future. "There's one more page," Daniel said softly. With trembling hands, I turned it over. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means someone betrayed my trust. If that person is Linda, then I'm more sorry than words can ever express. I ignored too many warning signs because I wanted to believe the best in people. Please don't make the same mistake I did. Protect your mother's legacy, protect yourself, and never forget, no matter what happens, always be kind." The room fell silent. It was the same sentence my mother had spoken before she died. The same sentence that had guided my life. The same sentence that had led Daniel back to me. I slowly folded the letter against my chest. "Daniel, if everything my father wrote is true, then Linda stole everything from me." Daniel looked me in the eyes. "Yes. And today, we're going to take it all back." For years, I believed the day Linda sold me for $100 was the day my life ended. I thought that moment proved everything she had spent years making me believe, that I was unwanted, that I was a burden, that I had no value, but I was wrong. Because the woman who thought she was destroying my future was actually sending me toward the person who would help me discover it. The world remembers the $100 Linda received that day. The neighbors remember the homeless man standing in the rain. They remember the clothes he wore. They remember the way he looked. But I remember something completely different. I remember his hand. The hand everyone else ignored. The hand everyone else judged. The hand that reached out to me when I had nobody left. Daniel never bought me. He never owned me. He never saw me as something broken that needed to be fixed. He simply reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was always worth saving. The world saw a homeless man with nothing, but I saw the first person in years who treated me like I was something. Linda thought she reduced my worth to $100. She thought she had taken away my future, but she never understood one thing. A person's value is never decided by what others are willing to pay for them. It is decided by the kindness they carry inside. Today, when I look back at that rainy afternoon, I don't see the humiliation anymore. I don't see the people who laughed. I don't see the woman who betrayed me. I see the moment my life changed. The moment a stranger reached out his hand and showed me that I was never alone. My stepmother sold me for $100, but she had no idea she was sending me to the person who would help me find my true worth. If you believe a person's worth should never be judged by their appearance, their money, or what they have lost, write "never judge" in the comments. Not because this is just a story, but because somewhere in the world, there is someone who needs to remember they are worth more than what others see. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more stories that remind us of the kindness still left in the world.